super high level spoiler warning. I'll be talking a bit about the game's mechanics and gameplay in this video, since I've been playing this game for all the hours I've been able to, which isn't a lot. Now, the network test didn't reveal anything about the story or anything like that, but the game isn't technically out yet, so if you'd rather experience the game for the first time with fresh eyes, this video probably isn't for you. Now, to be clear, this video doesn't have any gameplay of Duskblood of my own. Yeah, I sort of expected that. I'll try to supplement the video with the released footage and my best recreations, and I probably shouldn't even be talking about my experiences at all, but I didn't sign an NDA and ChatGPT says I'm fine, so here's hoping my channel isn't gone by. Elden Ring was one of my all-time favorite games of 2022, which I can justify by flashing my game hours on the screen. Since it's a high number, you know I'm telling the truth. On a side note, Furry Love 2 happens to be my number 1 on the list because I accidentally left it on. Not only do I think it's the peak of From games, but it also brought me my own niche hit video that I'm still coming down from the high of. When Night Rain was announced, I was ecstatic. It seemed like a great way to have some fun with friends for like a week or so, and when it came out, it was exactly that. And I was fine with that. The entire format was a great side entry into the series. Side entry, not something to introduce a new IP with. So when I saw that their next game was something in a similar vein, I was a little bit less excited. Elden Ring is already 4 years old now, and it really stings to have the knowledge that they were essentially only working on these multiplayer experiences for that time. Yes, I know, traditional Soulsborne games are in the works, but having any amount of focus split into these multiplayer projects kinda slows the process down. Regardless, it was still a From Software game, and I recently decided to make bad financial decisions. So I bought the console with somehow less games than the PS5 just for Duskblood. It was also for Rhythm Heaven Groove, but I also found out that was on the Switch 1, which I found out far too late. Honestly, I subscribe to the theory that Night Rain was a sort of litmus test to gauge interest in Duskbloods. And unfortunately, suckers like me bought the damn thing out of their love for this stupid logo. It being on the Switch is just so weird as well. Their justification was essentially just, yeah, Nintendo rocks, without anything that screams Nintendo only. Also, the Venn diagram of From fans, Soulsborne PvP fans, and people who are stupid enough to buy a Switch 2 has to have very little overlap. And I'd bet that everyone who registered got in, just for the sheer number. Now the elephant in the room. This game is Bloodborne Night Rain. The visuals and themes are strikingly similar, and I kid you not, there was a voice line saying, "That was a good hunt." I think there's two cases. One, they actually wanted to make a Bloodborne spin-off, but it's technically still Sony's IP to sit on and do nothing with. So they changed some things around to make it as legally similar to Bloodborne as possible without stepping on their toes too much. The second possibility is that their entire staff somehow just got CTE at the same time, and that they just kind of forgot Bloodborne existed and just came up with the same idea again. Seriously, it's like if they made another action RPG set in Japan with tight parry windows and then called it Kojima Light Revive Once, where the core theme is the cycle of death. Anyways, the first day of the network test came. I woke up at 6 AM in my local time, got on my best attire, and prepared for the first moments. And I was instantly greeted with an error notification. Yeah, the first test just straight up failed and they threw in the white flag. A bit of a buzzkill, but it is a network test for a reason. But whatever. I managed to make it for the other session that day, and starting off had the typical From Software beginning where you faced off against a hard foe to teach you the mechanics of the game. I only got around 10 minutes of pure PvE before I got hit with the message that I was at the boundary of the network test. So there's probably a lot more PvE content that's hidden behind. After loading into a similar Night Rain lobby, you enter another menu where, I kid you not, your character waits around like you're in a Fortnite lobby. This is where you can choose between all your different characters with all their unique abilities, and where you can choose your matchmaking settings. There were 3 in the network tests. Standard, where you enter solo and make alliances or enemies. The No Alliances game mode, where there was no teaming allowed and everyone just essentially just did PvP. And finally, there was a duo sort of mode, where you queued in with a buddy. I assume you can queue in with a predetermined buddy, but I don't know a Soulsborne fan who's stupid enough to buy a Switch 2, so I just matchmake with randoms. There was also a ranked mode not available in the network tests, which I would not want to touch with a 10-foot pole. Once you get into the game, you can choose the rough area of where to drop into on the map, kind of like Fortnite. Each game is divided in 3 phases, where you had to gain enough sigils to advance to the next phase. There's not an explicit cutoff. Instead, if you have the lowest or second lowest amount of sigils, you instantly die when the phase is over, and you get booted back to the lobby. You get these sigils through various actions in the game, such as fighting field bosses, and it can get pretty intense when you're fighting for that last spot with the next person with a couple dozen seconds left. Another example of getting sigils is capturing a hill and then holding it when the phase ends to secure the sigils. You can also form alliances with players to get some backup for some bosses, and there are harder raid-like bosses that the entire lobby can group up for, with your performance in those fights dictating your reward. That strategy in alliances almost becomes a metagame in itself, and I genuinely believe that the game would have benefited from VoIP using Nintendo's game chat, so that you can bargain with other people past just emotes. The pace of the game is very much Night Rain, where you have to plan out your course for the best odds. Since it's this channel, I already have a complaint about the map. The Night Rain one flowed really nicely in the midst of it all because you could keep on moving and it didn't really bring up a menu. In Duskbloods, you have to do a full stop to pull up your map, which always seems to happen when there's a Zork in the middle of kamikazing you. Moving around the map is quite alright. You can do a fountain-esque high jump whenever you want, and you have 3 air jumps as well. You can also sometimes open up the map and fast travel to certain points. Really useful when you're in a dead end and couldn't be bothered to backtrack. When you do inevitably die, you don't lose any levels or items, but you do lose a lot of time. If you were in the middle of fighting a boss, their HP is saved, so there's always the possibility that someone else will swoop in and take in the last hit, thus rewarding them with all the sigils and XP, despite you doing all the work. Moving on to the important part, how the game plays. I'm gonna start with an analogy because I'm a YouTuber who has no thoughts of his own to offer. The game feels like a fighting game version of Sekiro. Verticality is something that is heavily explored in this game. There's a poise bar, and they have perfect blocks in low of full-on parries. They even have air dashes, and their block works like the shield from Smash, where it can take a certain amount of damage. Going into combat with other players really showed me that there's a lot of skill expression that can be learned, which instantly made me want to quit the game and made the Venn diagram even smaller. There's also summons you can grab along the way called kins that level up alongside you. They can be really good distractions for bosses, and some of them even do DPS. If you manage to survive in the top 3, you get put in a Squid Game-esque deathmatch where the survivor wins the game. Honestly, this was a perfect example of skill diff, because I never made it to this point. The closest time I got to that point was when the server just straight up crashed. Why was the server so bad in the network test? To be completely honest, I've never really liked Soulsborne PvP. There's a certain clunkiness around it that I can never get used to, and that was definitely true for this game as well. At the end of the playtests, I couldn't help but wonder who this game was made for. Yeah, I do know that there is a non-negligible scene for competitive Soulsborne PvP players, and I do think that it's a great game for those people, but they locked the game to the Nintendo Switch, whose average audience plays Cozy Farming Simulator number 35. I really don't think they're gonna get much new fans, and I don't think old fans are gonna go out of their way to buy Switch 2 to play it. Also, in general, the game in my opinion does not have any staying power, and if they give it the same amount of post-launch support that they gave Night Rain, which is none, I could see this game being popular for 2 months at most before falling into a nosedive. On one hand, it's cool to see From Software branching out. This is clearly not their standard game, and there's a lot of cool ideas, and it really seems like it was a passion project for a lot of the people working on it. On the other hand, this might actually be the first new Souls game that I don't pick up at launch, despite me getting an entire Switch 2 for it. And I know, at the end of the day, I only played a network test. Everything I played and talked about is subject to change, but realistically, what I played is what I'd be getting on release date. We have precedents from the Night Rain tests where they changed very little apart from number tweaks and some visual changes. So basically, after all that yapping, and I'm sure you'll agree in the comments, it's a skill issue.